this morning's message. I hope that you each enjoyed your holiday weekend so far. And if you haven't done so yet, I encourage that each one of you take some time to really pray and think about what it means for our nation to be celebrating 250 years of independence. Independence from the king-led government in Great Britain. A king who many of the colonists, and this may surprise some people, many of the people in England also thought that he abused the English subjects in North America. Our Revolutionary War actually started as more of a civil war between the citizens of Great Britain and ended up a war for independence when King George III decided not to negotiate with the colonists, when he determined that defeating them on the battlefield was the only route to success. As we all know, it didn't work out so well for him. Definitely for him, for the rest of his career and his legacy. He is known as the king that lost the American colonies. And it did work out for Great Britain in the long run, but not so well for them 250 years ago. I don't know how many of you remember this, but I certainly remember. Some of you may not have been born yet, but I remember celebrating the 200th anniversary, which was called the Bicentennial. I spent the day water skiing with my dad and my uncle, and then that evening with my whole family, including my grandparents, watching fireworks over the lake. The perfect day for a boy who looked up both to my father and my uncle. My uncle, who just a few short years before that fought in Vietnam and was obviously living with a combined love for his country and incredible unhappiness with the leaders who disappointed him greatly. Probably a pretty common feeling for anybody who lives in a free nation as we do, and definitely for veterans and citizens who look to sinful people to solve their problems. Sinful people just like us who lead their nations. The psalmist tells us, "Put not your trust in princes, in a son of man, in whom there is no salvation. When his breath departs, he returns to the earth. On that very day, his plans perish. Blessed is he whose help is in the God of Jacob, whose hope is in the Lord his God, who made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, who keeps faith forever, who executes justice for the oppressed, who gives food to the hungry." This is important to remember this and think about this when we put our eternal salvation into the hands of men. Man is sinful, and we know as we make decisions, sin is always lurking around the corner. Yet, even as this is happening, God uses men and women to share his word, create ministries, and create and run governments, knowing the entire time that those in charge and those not in charge will be leading sinful lives. Most of you probably know this, but Europeans were in North America long before our revolution. So the European culture was ingrained in large parts of the North American continent. English in the east, Spanish out in the west and in the south. And I would recommend that if you haven't done so, that you really take an opportunity to study that history and to look at what we were and what we have become. A period of great blessing where people in this land have made great decisions and bad decisions, many times at the same time. And look at many sources, because you don't want to look at just one textbook or online. You want to look at many different sources, because a lot of times in one source, history is sanitized a bit. But real lives, human lives, are never sanitized. And many times what we study is not always uniform or even accurate. In the earliest settlements in my research that I've come up with, it's pretty commonly known, but there may be some that we're unaware of. The first one was in St. Augustine, Florida in 1565 by the Spanish. And then Jamestown was founded in 1607 by the English. I don't know if you've ever been to Jamestown. Very interesting place to go to. I've been there myself. My wife Sybil and I went there. Very beautiful area in the spring. So you can see why they picked that area. I don't know if they realize this, very unforgiving area in the summer and the winter. Very much so. In fact, a number of bodies are buried around the area where the original church was, and then they built another church after the original one burned down. And when we were there, I had a chance to talk to an archaeologist. To this very day, they're finding different burial spots around that church they didn't know about all these years later. So many came over, and so many people did not even make it out of that settlement. People who braved the new world to leave true despots behind. And the reason I bring up the first arrivals is that many of the founders of our nation were born here, as were their parents and even their grandparents. Many of them had been here for multiple generations. In fact, some of you may also know this, the first Europeans to land in North America were the Vikings in about 1000 AD, and they landed in Newfoundland, up what is now in Canada. Yet scientists are beginning to discover things at that settlement that show that they actually traveled down the East Coast into what is now the continental United States. And we have no idea what happened to them. Just kind of disappeared over time. So this beautiful and blessed land that we live in has a complex history. And this should be of no surprise to anybody. It was founded by incredibly intelligent, brave, ambitious, adventurous, sometimes very reckless and brutal people. Definitely flawed men and women who descended from flawed men and women. And from them, we descended and were flawed men and women. And yes, many of our founders were sinful followers of Jesus. None of us were alive at the time of the revolution to really witness the amazing and brutal events that occurred, that set the stage for the creation of this nation. It started in combat. We had the Declaration of Independence on July 4, 1776. And then after that, many years of brutal warfare, combat, of course, starvation, agony, that culminated in the creation, finally, of the Constitution that the world still marvels at. A Constitution which ingrained in its First Amendment our freedom to worship as we choose. Part of the reason I love this country so much is that we can worship as we choose. And it actually reads, and if you haven't read the Constitution, which I've read many times, I recommend you read it for yourself instead of having somebody else read it for you and tell you about it. The First Amendment says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress for grievances. This, of course, was not by accident. Many of the European rulers, kings, queens, princes, decided for their people how they were going to worship, what denomination they were going to belong to. And if they didn't do that, they were cast out or worse. Because our founders had firsthand knowledge about what it meant to have others make decisions for them, including how to worship, when they freed themselves, they wanted to ensure that the worst of what they heard about lived in North America at the hands of a king would never happen here again. From their experience comes our ability to worship Jesus without interference. Of course, there's always going to be sin around. There's always going to be someone who tries to interfere. But no matter the stress that this brings upon his church here on this earth, also know, even if we didn't have this right within this nation, that nothing or nobody is stronger than the Holy Spirit. Nothing that can be thrown at his church on this earth can survive the power of the Holy Spirit. We may not always be physically protected, but we're called to be his followers. And as we do so in this nation, in which we can freely do, we should always remember and pray for our brothers and sisters around the world who worship, fearing for their safety and even their life. And of course, Since at least I was in the university, but I think this started before I was in the university, it became a pastime to study and critique what the founders of our nation did wrong. Because it's always good to look at what somebody else did wrong instead of what we do wrong. It's one of the things that I noticed about my life. It's so much easier to look at someone else's faults and forget that I have my own personal faults. And it became very much a pastime. They did a lot of incredible things, and yes, they did some terrible things. Yes, they chose to keep people in bondage for their own economic well-being. These were decisions that they made as sinful human beings. Decisions that are terrible decisions. Yet as we reflect upon those, we should reflect upon our own personal decisions many times. Because as we view their actions, whether we praise or criticize or both, I often wonder when our lives are finished on this earth, if there was a study by other sinful human beings of our behavior and our decision-making, how that would go for us. I wonder how my legacy would be viewed. Probably not as good as I would hope. And that's important to remember because our sin really tends to stand out in our lives. And of course, that's the reason Jesus came for us. This isn't something we can correct ourselves. None of us can pass the good test. And as I've grown older, Jesus' words, as recorded by St. Matthew, really resonate with me more and more. Judge not, that you be not judged. For with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. So however you judge people, that is how you will be judged. Why do you seek the speck that is in your brother's eye? Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Very powerful words that I have to remind myself about all the time. And not because I've done something great. Usually it's because of the opposite. I usually have to remind myself of this after I mentioned many times, I read news apps, usually right after I jump on somebody's ridiculous behavior. And of course, I don't correct myself right away. I have to rationalize my thoughts and comments for a couple minutes. Then I remember what Jesus said about judgment. We will be judged as we judge others. And that's true, and because that's true, I'm eternally grateful that Jesus came to this earth for my sins. And this sinful behavior is not unique to us, the founders of our nation, or the early explorers, whether they were English, Dutch, Spanish, French, Russian, or even the people who traveled across what the scientists believe was a land bridge from Asia to North America. They all suffered from sin. And despite us romanticizing the people we like and really demonizing the people that we like less or not at all, sin goes back to the beginning, is prevalent to this very moment, goes back to the garden when Eve and Adam sinned. And of course, God has given us the ability to look at someone's life and be grateful what they did for us, as I am very grateful for what the founders did for us, and to also at the same time understand they were human beings and they had failings and they sinned. And God gives us a lot of people to choose from when we want to look at people to emulate and understand that we're all sinful followers of Christ. In fact, the list is long in his word. It is incredibly long. Some of my favorite people, some of the people we view as the greatest, as we read about them, men and women of the Bible, were terrible sinners. In fact, Saul, who became Paul, actually referred to his place as a sinner as, of whom I am the foremost. Paul viewed himself as a chief of sinners. And in today's epistle, Paul writes, "For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I keep on doing. Now, if I do what I do not want, it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells within me. So I find it to be a law that when I want to do right, evil lies close at hand." Very powerful self-indictment. He was talking about himself. And this was an apostle of Jesus who Jesus blinded on the road to Damascus and called him directly. And Paul still continued to sin. And personally, I would love to think that this is only a description of Paul's behavior and believe that we have somehow become better over all these years. But I know that it applies to me as well as to the men and women who founded this nation, who fought in our wars, wrote our Constitution, to the men and women, the millions of them who worked to have amendments added to our Constitution. This is the sin. This sin is human condition. And Jesus didn't come just for the people who know that they sin. He also came for the people who believe that others sin, but they're personally doing pretty well. He came for the judgmental. He came for the persecutor. He came for the patriot and the traitor. He came for the establishment, and he came for the protester. He came from the victim, and he came for the murderer. He came for the forgotten veteran. He came for everybody, and he came for you and me. And it may seem kind of out of place this week as we read it from Zechariah, the Old Testament reading. Seems more a little bit for Palm Sunday, but it is very appropriate. It tells us about the arrival of Jesus into Jerusalem before he went to the cross for us. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you, righteous and having salvation is he. Humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. And this is exactly how Jesus arrived in Jerusalem. He arrived in great contrast to how his fallen creation would do it, how we would plan to arrive if we were a great conqueror. The King of Kings arrived in a manner that the kings of the earth and their subjects, us, might find very much beneath ourselves. And he came so he could die the death that the sinners deserve. He came to free us from our sins. Jesus, both God and man, came to do for us what we could never do for ourselves. In fact, every good that man does, as Paul writes, has sin lurking around the corner. I don't know if you ever experienced this, but I do. Each time I think I'm doing something good, especially if I don't include God in my plans, it's always hanging around. And I don't mean like we always look for big things. It could be as simple as me deciding just to do it my own way. I don't need any help, and I don't need anybody to give me any direction, because I'm sure it'll go well. It's just goes the way I want it to go. And I pray, as we evaluate the constant issues going on in this world, that we do so as followers of Jesus, to remind ourselves who we are as we look on our apps, look at our news apps, look at people behaving in ways that we think are absolutely ridiculous, that we do so as followers of Jesus, of forgiving people who pray for the people of our nation and of this world who are lost in their own judgment and condemnation. People who are lost in the pain of their past and their present sin. People who need to know what Jesus did for them. And Jesus invites us and them, everyone, to come to him with their trials and troubles. Come to him with our hurts and losses. Come to him when no one or nothing can help us. No new law nor person alive, whether they're a leader or a follower, who can fix our problems. Jesus is there for every moment in our lives. He comes to us always with the words that we need to hear. He said, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." He tells each one of us that he will take our burdens upon him. He took them for the people who founded our nation, for the people who fought for this nation, and even for the people who fought against this nation. He takes burdens from all of his followers. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus.